I'm the kindergarten teacher his son adores. During the parent-teacher conference, the Mafia boss studied me like his next target. My boy needs a mother, he said. Congratulations, you've just been promoted. The soles of my sensible pumps, scuffed beyond repair, felt thin against the grimy linoleum. Each step echoed the hollow thrum of my bank account, a lamentable, ever-present score to the symphony of my life. Outside, the early autumn air carried the scent of wet leaves and exhaust fumes, a fitting prelude to the eviction notice tucked beneath the ancient textbooks on my desk. Another rental property sold, another month of scraping by reduced to a week. My car, a faithful but faltering companion, had chosen this morning to breathe its last in the school parking lot, a plume of acrid smoke its final declaration. I traced the laminated attendance sheet, the names of my kindergarten class a familiar comfort. Alexei Volkov. Even the print of his name held a subtle weight. He was a quiet boy, all solemn eyes and thoughtful silences, far too contained for a child his age. His intelligence gleamed, sharp and unexpected, behind a facade of reserved politeness. He was without a doubt my favorite. And today, I faced his father. A chill, unrelated to the school's perpetually malfunctioning HVAC, feathered across my skin as a shadow fell over my open classroom door. I did not look up immediately, instead smoothing the faint crease from Alexei's latest drawing, a startlingly intricate depiction of a black wolf silhouetted against a blood-red moon. My pulse quickened, a nervous flutter in my throat. Ms. Clara, a word. The voice was a low current of sound, less spoken than commanded, thick with an accent I couldn't quite place but recognized as belonging to a world far removed from elementary school hallways. My fingers tightened on the crayon drawing. I lifted my gaze and the breath caught in my lungs, refusing to resume its rhythmic flow. Nikolai Volkov filled the doorway, eclipsing the weak afternoon light. He was a force, not merely a man. His dark suit, impeccably tailored, draped over broad shoulders that seemed to stretch the confines of the frame. Black hair, cut with ruthless precision, framed a face carved from granite, stark and unyielding. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept over the organized chaos of my classroom, missing nothing. They settled on me, a predatory appraisal that made every nerve ending in my body hum with sudden, unwelcome awareness. Mr. Volkov, I managed, my voice thinner than I liked. I rose, trying to project an authority I didn't feel, the cheap fabric of my skirt pulling taut across my hips. Alexei is right here. He shifted his weight, a subtle movement that suggested coiled power, and stepped fully into the room. The scent of expensive cologne, woodsy and dangerous, enveloped me, stealing the mundane smell of crayons and disinfectant. Alexei, perched on a stool by the easel, looked up, his small face brightening. "Papa," he exclaimed, a rare burst of unfiltered joy. Nikolai's gaze softened for a fleeting fraction of a second, a warmth that was shocking in its intensity, before hardening once more as it returned to me. This man was a chameleon, capable of shifting masks with terrifying ease. "My son speaks highly of you," he stated, his eyes dissecting me from the worn tips of my shoes to the hastily pinned bun at the nape of my neck. It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment. "Says you are resourceful." The word hung in the air, weighted with unspoken meaning. I chose to interpret it as a positive observation of my teaching skills. "I try to encourage creative problem-solving," I replied, a small defiance coloring my tone. A traitorous part of me thrilled at the challenge in his gaze. Before he could respond, a shrill wail pierced the air from the hallway, followed by the clatter of something heavy hitting the floor. Mrs. Henderson, a parent notorious for her fiery temper, erupted, her voice a raw, furious shriek. "You incompetent fools! My child could have been seriously hurt. This entire school is a joke." My shoulders slumped. This was Mrs. Henderson's child, Liam, a boy prone to elaborate tantrums when not given his way. A moment later, a small, red-faced boy burst into my classroom, followed by his mother, a whirlwind of outrage. Liam, in a furious paroxysm, grabbed a carefully constructed tower of wooden blocks and sent it crashing. Other children gasped. Some began to cry. "Liam, stop that immediately!" I commanded, my voice firm despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. He ignored me, his small face contorted with rage, picking up a heavy wooden toy train and raising it as if to hurl it. Mrs. Henderson stood behind him, oblivious, screaming at the unseen principal in the hallway. "I'm calling the district. You'll all be fired. My gaze locked on the train in Liam's hand, then on the terrified face of a little girl cowering nearby. The train, thrown with a child's desperate strength, could cause serious harm. My mind raced, weighing options, discarding them. There wasn't time to physically intervene without escalating the situation further. I moved, not towards Liam, but towards Alexei. My hand rested gently on his shoulder, drawing him subtly away from the line of fire. Then, my voice, calm and clear, sliced through the escalating chaos. Liam, look at me. He paused, the train still raised, his breath hitching. His eyes wide and unfocused met mine. That train, I continued, my tone gentle, almost conspiratorial, needs to take an important journey. It's carrying a very special passenger. I crouched slightly, opening my hands, palms up. Can you help it find its track? It's lost. Liam's arm wavered, his brow furrowed in confusion, his anger momentarily diverted. He lowered the train, clutching it. His mother, still shouting in the doorway, didn't notice. Just like Alexei's wolf, I whispered, pointing to the drawing still clutched in my other hand. Your train is going on an adventure, but it can't go if it's angry. It needs to be brave. Can you show it how brave you are? The boy hesitated for another moment. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, he walked to the train table, carefully placing the toy on the tracks. The fury drained from his small face, replaced by a fierce concentration. He began pushing it, making quiet choo-choo sounds. Mrs. Henderson, finally noticing the sudden quiet, stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth worked, then snapped shut. She looked from her now calm son to me, a flicker of bewildered resentment in her eyes. How? She started. Sometimes, redirection is all a child needs, I offered, my gaze meeting hers, unflinching. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice remained steady. Nikolai Volkov stood by the door, unmoving, watching the entire exchange. His presence had been a silent, powerful anchor, but his face betrayed nothing beyond a deepening intensity in his storm-gray eyes. Now, as Mrs. Henderson sputtered an apology and retreated, dragging a surprisingly placid Liam with her, Nikolai stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that resonated like a gunshot. He walked past me, his gaze sweeping over Liam's wolf drawing, now held loosely in my hand. His fingers, long and elegant despite their evident strength, brushed mine as he took the paper. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through my arm. My skin prickled where his touch had lingered. Resourceful, he repeated, his voice even lower than before. A purr of sound. He examined the drawing, a hint of something unreadable in his gaze. My son often struggles to express himself. You found a way. My throat felt tight, suddenly dry. I tried to pull my hand back, but it felt strangely rooted to the spot, tingling from his proximity. It's important to understand a child's perspective, I finally managed, forcing air into my lungs. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. The depth of his stare was unnerving, as if he could peel back the layers of my composure and see the frantic pulse beneath. Indeed, he murmured, a valuable skill. He handed back the drawing, his fingers again brushing mine, a deliberate caress this time. My skin burned. I heard about your vehicle, Miss Clara, he stated, abruptly changing tack. My driver informed me it presented a rather dramatic display in the parking lot this morning. My cheeks flushed. Of course he knew. Nothing escaped this man. It's an old car, I said, shrugging, trying to appear nonchalant. It was due, was it? He took another step closer, infringing on my personal space, his scent now an intoxicating cloud around me. Or was it simply exhausted from overwork, like its owner? My composure frayed. His words, soft as they were, felt like a direct assault, stripping away my practiced indifference. He saw too much, he knew about the unpaid bills, the mounting anxieties, the solitary struggle. I'm perfectly fine, Mr. Volkov, I insisted, my voice gaining a brittle edge. A corner of his mouth lifted, a slow predatory curve that sent a tremor through me. It wasn't a smile of mirth, but one of knowing, of power. No, Ms. Clara, he corrected, his voice a silken thread. I think you are far from fine. I think you are tired, alone, and facing insurmountable challenges. My breath hitched. How dare he? How did he know? And what right did he have to speak of my private despair? That's none of your concern, I snapped, taking a step back, the wall now pressing against my spine. He simply watched me, his expression unperturbed. Everything concerning Alexei becomes my concern, And you, Ms. Clara, are very much a part of Alexei's world. He paused, his gaze dropping to my lips, then back to my eyes. A silent, unsettling promise. My son requires stability, a consistent, nurturing presence, someone resourceful. The words were innocent enough, but the subtext roared. He was circling, a predator scenting weakness. I am Alexei's teacher, I said, trying to reassert the professional boundary he was so effortlessly dismantling. My role is to educate him, not to provide stability outside of the classroom. And what happens, Ms. Clara, when you can no longer afford to come to the classroom? His eyes held mine, unblinking, unwavering. When the rent becomes too high? When the old car gives out for good? When the weight of your challenges becomes too heavy to bear? A cold dread seeped into my bones. He knew about the eviction. He knew about the car. He knew everything. My carefully constructed walls crumbled, exposing the raw, desperate vulnerability beneath. The blood drained from my face, leaving a prickling chill. I have a proposition for you, Ms. Clara. He moved closer still, his imposing height looming over me, trapping me against the wall. His voice dropped to a near whisper, a hypnotic murmur that bypassed my ears and went straight to my churning gut. My boy needs a mother, and you, Ms. Clara, have just been promoted. My mind reeled, grasping for purchase, for logic, for an escape. This wasn't a request. This wasn't an offer. This was a declaration, absolute and terrifying. My throat closed, air refusing to pass. He stood there, impossibly close, his eyes gleaming with an possessive certainty that stole my breath. A silent, potent threat. And I knew, with a terrifying clarity that settled deep in my bones, that my world had just irrevocably changed. My mind reeled, grasping for purchase, for logic, for an escape. This wasn't a request. This wasn't an offer. This was a declaration, absolute and terrifying. My throat closed, air refusing to pass. He stood there, impossibly close, his eyes gleaming with an possessive certainty that stole my breath. A silent, potent threat. And I knew, with a terrifying clarity that settled deep in my bones, that my world had just irrevocably changed. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating between us. The mundane sounds of the school day, distant laughter, the rumble of a cleaning cart, seemed to recede, leaving only the thunder of my own pulse in my ears. The weight of his presence was an oppressive mantle, pressing against my chest, stealing oxygen from my lungs. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, to push past him and run, but my feet felt cemented to the floor. My gaze, wide and frantic, searched his for a flicker of jest, a hint of sardonic humor, anything to shatter the chilling conviction radiating from him. There was nothing but stark, unwavering resolve. You can't be serious, I finally managed. The words a thin, reedy whisper escaping my constricted throat. My voice trembled, betraying the terror coiling in my gut. This is preposterous. I am a teacher. And you are Alexei's father. The absurdity of the statement felt like a shield, flimsy but all I had. A low sound, not quite a laugh but certainly amusement, rumbled in his chest. It was a dark, unsettling note, devoid of warmth. Preposterous or merely expedient, Ms. Clara? He leaned in, the faint scent of his cologne now a suffocating cloud. My breath hitched. Your situation, as I understand it, is rather dire. No car, no home within the month. No family to lean upon. No significant other to offer support. Each item was delivered like a carefully placed stone, building an inescapable wall around me. His words weren't questions. They were declarations of fact, meticulously gathered and now weaponized. My cheeks flamed. The invasion, the cold, calculating dissection of my life, was an unbearable affront. You have no right to investigate my personal circumstances, I retorted, my voice gaining a desperate edge, though it still lacked true force. The indignation warred with the rising tide of despair. He had laid bare my vulnerabilities, leaving me exposed. I have every right. He corrected smoothly, his eyes holding mine, unblinking. When those circumstances threaten Alexei's stability, they become my concern. You are a remarkable teacher, Ms. Clara. My son thrives under your guidance. He adores you. That cannot be, interrupted by such mundane inconveniences as financial ruin. His hand lifted, a slow, deliberate movement, and his fingers grazed my jawline, a touch so light it felt like a brand. A sharp gasp escaped me. My skin ignited, a foreign heat spreading beneath his touch. I'm offering you a solution. A permanent one. My entire body stiffened. The sheer audacity, the cold, ruthless logic of his proposal, stole my voice. A permanent solution. He spoke of marriage as if it were a simple acquisition, a business merger to secure his son's emotional well-being. But the way his thumb brushed the sensitive skin just below my ear, lingering, was anything but impersonal. It was a claim. "I don't want your solution," I whispered, turning my head slightly, trying to escape his touch. His fingers tightened just a fraction, keeping me captive. My gaze flickered to the door, a sudden desperate longing for escape. "But you need it," he countered, his voice a silken thread, laced with an unsettling certainty. "And my son needs you. I have already arranged for your car to be taken to my estate for repair. Your belongings are being moved as we speak. Your eviction notice, Ms. Clara, has been rescinded." He paused, allowing the implications to sink in. "Consider it a deposit, a down payment on our arrangement." My blood ran cold. My mouth fell open, but no sound emerged. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a fait accompli. He hadn't asked. He had acted. He had systematically dismantled my life and then offered to reassemble it, piece by piece, exactly as he desired. The sheer terrifying scale of his control choked me. He hadn't just known about my problems. He had preemptively solved them, twisting every perceived weakness into a lever against me. Before I could form a coherent protest, a sharp rap sounded at the door. Nikolai's hand dropped from my face, and the sudden absence of his touch left my skin tingling, strangely bereft. He turned, his features hardening, the momentary intimacy dissolving into a mask of stone. "Enter," he commanded, his voice a low growl. A man, built like a brute but dressed in a suit as expensive as Nikolai's, stepped inside. His eyes, small and watchful, darted to me for a fraction of a second, then fixed on his employer. He spoke in a rapid burst of Russian, his tone urgent, agitated. Nikolai listened, utterly still. His gaze narrowed, the winter storm in his eyes gathering ferocity. He responded in the same guttural language, a few sharp, clipped sentences. The subordinate visibly flinched, his shoulders hunching. He mumbled a reply, then moved to leave. "Wait," Nikolai said, his voice quiet, dangerously calm. He turned back to me, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Ms. Clara, a moment," he gestured to the brutish man. "Boris, tell Ms. Clara what you have just reported." Boris's gaze flickered to me again, then back to Nikolai. Apprehension etched on his face. "Sir, with all due respect, this is not for her ears." Nikolai took a step closer to Boris, his towering frame dwarfing the other man. "Tell her," he repeated, the two words delivered with the weight of an executioner's decree. "She needs to understand." Boris swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically. "The warehouse, Don Volkov. The shipment of pharmaceuticals. It was intercepted. One of the new associates, a man named Ivan, he tipped off a rival family, believed he could profit from the disruption." My stomach churned. Pharmaceuticals, rival families. The words painted a chilling picture, a world of illicit dealings and brutal consequences far removed from my classroom. My gaze, drawn by a morbid curiosity, settled on Nikolai. His face was devoid of emotion, a blank canvas of lethal intent. "And Ivan?" Nikolai asked, his voice smooth as polished stone. Boris hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "He was dealt with, severely. The message was sent. No one crosses you, Don Volkov." The last words were almost a plea. Nikolai nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. His eyes, however, were not on Boris, but on me. "You see, Miss Clara?" he murmured, his voice cutting through the suddenly frigid air. "There are rules, boundaries, and when they are crossed, there are consequences. Immediate, irrevocable." His gaze drilled into mine, a silent, potent warning. "The safety I offer comes with an expectation of loyalty. From everyone within my orbit." The unspoken threat hung heavy between us. He was showing me unequivocally the cost of disobedience. My breath caught, lodged somewhere in my throat, hot and sharp. This wasn't a man who negotiated. This was a man who commanded, whose will was absolute, and whose displeasure was absolute destruction. Boris, clearly sensing the shift in the air, excused himself with a hasty bow and vanished. Nikolai turned back to me fully, the grim reality of his words still echoing in the silent classroom. "Now," he said, his voice returning to that low, hypnotic current. "We have wasted enough time. Alexei is waiting." He didn't offer his hand, nor did he ask me to follow. He simply turned and walked towards the door, expecting me to obey. My legs felt like lead, my mind numb with shock and a terrifying realization. I had no choice. Every avenue of escape had been systematically sealed off. My life, my very autonomy, had been stolen in the span of a few harrowing minutes. A cold, hard kernel of fear lodged itself in my chest, but beneath it, a tiny, defiant spark ignited. I would not simply be a pawn in his game. With stiff, uncooperative limbs, I followed him out of the classroom, my sensible pumps clicking hollowly on the linoleum. The school suddenly seemed too small, too fragile, utterly incapable of containing the dark force that had just annexed my existence. Alexei, still quietly pushing his train, looked up, his small face brightening at the sight of his father and me. The innocent joy in his eyes was a sharp counterpoint to the turmoil raging within me, cementing the invisible chains that now bound me. Outside, a sleek black sedan, impossibly long and tinted, idled at the curb. The driver, a ghost in a dark uniform, opened the rear passenger door for me. Nikolai gestured, his eyes daring me to refuse. My active choice was an internal battle, a silent scream against the inevitable. But the image of Liam's train, about to be hurled, flashed through my mind, and the memory of Alexei's small, trusting hand on my shoulder. I could not abandon him. Not yet. I slid onto the plush leather seat, the interior a cocoon of hushed luxury. Nikolai settled beside me, his proximity in the confined space stealing the air from my lungs. The door clicked shut with a muffled thud, sealing me inside, severing me from the last vestiges of my old life. The car glided away from the curb, leaving the familiar school behind, a rapidly shrinking beacon of lost normalcy. The drive was silent, punctuated only by the low hum of the engine. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the world rush by, a parade of strangers blissfully unaware of the seismic shift in my universe. My mind spun, trying to grasp the implications. Marriage, to him. A criminal, a man who spoke of consequences with chilling detachment. And Alexei, my sweet, quiet Alexei. The thought of abandoning him was unbearable, a sharp pang in my chest. He was the anchor, the reason I couldn't simply dissolve into hysterics. The car turned off the main road, winding through a secluded, tree-lined lane that grew progressively grander. Imposing iron gates, embellished with an ornate, unfamiliar crest, swung open silently as we approached. They closed behind us with a resonant clang that echoed like the final sentence of a verdict. The estate was vast, sprawling acres of manicured lawns and ancient trees, culminating in a sprawling mansion of dark stone and gleaming glass. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, a gilded cage indeed. The sedan pulled up to the imposing front doors, which were already opening, revealing a vast, cavernous foyer. A woman, sharp-faced and severe, stood waiting. She was dressed in a dark uniform, her posture rigid. She gave me a cursory, appraising glance that held no warmth. Nikolai stepped out first, then extended a hand, not to help me, but to command me. I ignored it, pushing myself out of the vehicle, my legs still shaky. My eyes swept over the opulent space, marble floors gleaming under the soft glow of a massive crystal chandelier, dark wood paneling, an imposing staircase sweeping upwards. It was breathtaking, overwhelming, and utterly alien. "Welcome, Ms. Clara," Nikolai said, his voice resonating in the expansive space. "This is your new home." The woman in the uniform stepped forward. "Don Volkov, dinner will be served in an hour. Alexei is in the solarium." Her tone was clipped, efficient. "Thank you, Irina," Nikolai replied. He turned back to me, his gaze sweeping over my disheveled appearance with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "Irina will show you to your quarters. I expect you to be presentable for dinner." It wasn't a request for proper attire. It was a demand for my immediate assimilation. Irina led me up the grand staircase, her silence more unnerving than any chattering. The corridor stretched endlessly, lined with closed doors and hushed whispers. We stopped at a heavy oak door, which she pushed open without a knock. The room was immense, a master suite beyond anything I could have ever imagined. A king-sized bed dominated the space, draped in rich fabrics. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the expansive grounds. A walk-in closet, a luxurious bathroom. It was beautiful and utterly suffocating. "Your belongings have been placed in the wardrobe," Irina stated, her voice flat. "Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." She left, closing the door softly, but with an air of finality that echoed the gates outside. I stood in the center of the room, feeling like a doll in an oversized dollhouse. My fingers trembled as I touched the silk bedspread, the cool, unfamiliar texture doing nothing to ground me. My gaze fell upon a small, antique writing desk in the corner, perhaps a phone, a line to the outside world. I rushed towards it, my heart hammering with a desperate hope. A leather-bound notebook and a delicate pen rested upon its surface. No phone. My old flip phone, my lifeline to my meager connections, was gone. Panic clawed at my throat. I walked to the windows, pulling aside the heavy velvet drapes. The view was magnificent, endless lawns giving way to dense forest. My new gilded cage. I looked for a latch, a way to open the window, but they were sealed tight, impenetrable. A cold dread settled in, deepening. I turned from the window, my eyes scanning the room, searching for any sign of a way out. The door. It was heavy, solid. I needed to test it. I needed to know the limits of my prison. My hand reached for the brass handle. It turned smoothly, silently. My breath caught in my throat. Hope, fragile and fleeting, flared in my chest. I pulled. The door opened, revealing a dimly lit hallway, grand and echoing. I took a tentative step out, the silence of the mansion pressing in on me. I listened, my senses heightened for any sound, any presence. Nothing. This was my chance. I could explore, I could find a way. My heart thrumming, I ventured further, each step a small act of defiance. I was not a prisoner, not truly. I was a guest, a very unwelcome, unwilling guest, but a guest nonetheless. There had to be an exit, a back door, a staff entrance. I passed several doors, each one closed, silent. The air grew colder, an unnerving chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Then, as I rounded a corner, a low, guttural growl shattered the silence. I froze, every muscle in my body locking. The sound was not human. It was deep, primal, a predatory warning. It came from the shadowed alcove ahead, where a massive, dark shape stirred. 2 points of amber light glowed in the gloom. A wolf, bigger than any I had ever seen, its fur the color of midnight, its eyes fixed on me with chilling intensity. It rose slowly, silently, a formidable beast of muscle and fang. A collar gleamed faintly around its thick neck, but it offered no comfort. This was not a pet. This was a guardian, a sentinel. My breath hitched. The creature took a slow, deliberate step towards me, then another. Its growl deepened, a vibrating rumble in its chest that spoke of lethal power. And as it drew closer, the amber eyes burning into mine, I saw a familiar glint of intelligence, an unnerving recognition. It was a black wolf, silhouetted against a blood-red moon, just like Alexi's drawing. And it was guarding the hall. Nikolai's personal guard. Nikolai's personal reminder of who owned this territory. And now, who owned me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. There was no escape, not in this gilded cage, not from the man who commanded even the wild, and not from the watchful, ancient eyes of his beast. I took a terrified step back, the growl intensifying, and realized with a sickening lurch that I was not alone here. And I was not safe. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. There was no escape, not in this gilded cage, not from the man who commanded even the wild, and not from the watchful, ancient eyes of his beast. I took a terrified step back, the growl intensifying, and realized with a sickening lurch that I was not alone here. And I was not safe. The wolf took another measured step, its massive head lowering slightly, those amber eyes never leaving mine. A low snarl vibrated in the air, a warning that echoed in my very bones. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but a strange clinical detachment surfaced. It wasn't attacking, not yet. It was holding me, a living barrier. Its message was clear. Stay. A quiet click, barely audible above the blood thrumming in my ears, announced Nikolai's presence. He stood at the far end of the hallway, a dark silhouette against the deeper shadows. His gaze flickered from the wolf to me, a slow, appraising sweep that held no surprise, no anger even, only a chilling assessment. Cage, he murmured, the name a soft command that barely stirred the air. The wolf's growl subsided instantly, though its eyes remained fixed on me. She merely explores, like a caged bird testing the bars. His voice was low, resonant, carrying a thread of dry amusement. My cheeks flushed. He had known I would try to leave. Known. And simply allowed his silent, formidable guard dog to intercept me. The humiliation burned, but it also sharpened my defiance. I wasn't trying to escape, I lied, my voice wavering despite my best efforts. I was stretching my legs. After the drive. He stepped forward, the faint gleam of the chandelier catching on the expensive fabric of his suit. Indeed. He stopped a few feet from Cage, his hand resting casually on the wolf's massive head, stroking its fur with an unnerving ease. The creature leaned into his touch, a soft rumble escaping its chest. The contrast between the beast's raw power and Nikolai's casual command was stark, chilling. You seemed rather determined to stretch them in the direction of the servants' exit. My breath hitched. He knew everything, always. The cold reality of his surveillance pressed in, crushing. I just needed some fresh air, I insisted, forcing a semblance of composure into my tone. My eyes, however, were still drawn to the wolf, its intelligent gaze unsettling. He's magnificent. Nikolai's lips curved, a sliver of white against the dark granite of his face. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of predatory satisfaction. He is, he agreed, his eyes never leaving mine. Loyal, protective, a sentinel, an extension of my will. The subtext was a hammer blow. Just like you will be. My stomach clenched. He's certainly effective, I retorted, a bite in my voice I hadn't known I possessed. A flicker of something, perhaps admiration, perhaps renewed assessment, crossed Nikolai's eyes. Precisely, he affirmed, his thumb brushing Kaga's ear. Now I believe Irina mentioned dinner, and a certain expectation of presentability. He gestured with a slight tilt of his head towards my room, the implication clear. The informal exploration was over. The formal assimilation began now. I turned on my heel, ignoring the tremor in my knees, and walked back to the oversized suite. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing with the hollow ring of my lost freedom. I leaned against it for a moment, my chest heaving, the scent of expensive wood and cold stone filling my lungs. Irina, efficient and silent, had indeed laid out a gown on the bed. It was a rich, jewel-toned emerald, a deep green that would make my eyes, usually a forgettable hazel, stand out. The silk felt impossibly soft against my skin, the cut deceptively simple but undeniably elegant. It was the kind of dress that whispered of wealth and status, a complete antithesis to my scuffed pumps and worn skirts. This wasn't just clothing, it was a uniform, a costume for the role he demanded I play. Stripping off my everyday clothes, I moved into the expansive bathroom. The marble was cool beneath my bare feet. A deep, claw-footed tub gleamed, already filled with steaming water, fragrant with lavender. I sank into the warmth, letting it seep into my aching muscles, a traitorous sigh escaping my lips. Everything in me screamed against the gilded cage, the stolen autonomy, the monstrous proposition. Yet the silk against my skin, the steaming water, the scent of luxury, some insidious part of me, the part weary of constant struggle, found a dangerous solace in it. It was a tempting whisper of ease, of release from the relentless grind. I dressed, the silk flowing around me like liquid moonlight. The emerald shimmered, transforming my reflection. I barely recognized the woman staring back, poised, elegant, a stranger. A ghost of a smile touched my lips, sharp and unbidden. Perhaps if I was to be a pawn, I could at least learn to play the game with style. When I descended the grand staircase, Nikolai was waiting in the vast foyer, Alexei standing solemnly beside him. My son, I thought, a strange possessiveness already taking root. His small face, usually so reserved, brightened instantly upon seeing me. Miss Clara? Nikolai's gaze swept over me, lingering. His eyes, those winter storms, held an unreadable depth. He said nothing, but a slow, appreciative gleam entered his stare. It wasn't a compliment, but an acknowledgement, a silent message that I had met his expectations. The heat that coiled in my stomach was unwelcome, yet undeniably present. Dinner was served in a cavernous dining room, the table laden with an array of dishes I couldn't name. Alexei, surprisingly animated, chattered about his day, drawing me into a world of finger paints and storybooks. Nikolai listened, his attention unwavering, occasionally interjecting with a question for Alexei, or a pointed glance at me. He orchestrated the conversation, a conductor of his own symphony. Under the table, I felt a feather-light brush against my knee. My breath hitched. Nikolai's leg, encased in dark wool, was now resting against mine. The contact was subtle, barely there, yet utterly electrifying. I froze, my eyes darting to his face. He continued to speak to Alexei, his expression utterly benign, but a predatory glint in his eyes betrayed his awareness of the havoc he wreaked within me. My internal battlefield raged. Every rational thought shrieked at the blatant intimidation, the calculated violation of my personal space. But that traitorous spark, ignited by the silk and the lavender, found a dangerous thrill in the unspoken challenge, the subtle power play. Later, as Alexei was dismissed to his room, Nikolai led me to a study. Walls lined with books, dark wood, the scent of leather and old paper. He settled behind a massive mahogany desk, gesturing to the chair opposite. "So, Miss Clara, tell me your thoughts on loyalty." My spine stiffened. The shift in tone was abrupt, a sudden cold plunge. "Loyalty is earned," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "Through trust and respect." He leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "An interesting perspective. Some would argue it is owed to family, to a leader." He paused, his gaze pinning me. "You saw what happened to Ivan today, a man who valued personal gain over loyalty." My mouth felt dry. The image of the shadowy warehouse, the implied violence, flashed through my mind. "I saw a display of ruthless power," I corrected, my voice betraying a hint of defiance. "Not necessarily loyalty." A low sound, again not a laugh, escaped him. "And what do you think happened to Ivan?" My throat tightened. "I think he paid a very steep price for his disloyalty." "Indeed." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "A cost I would not wish upon anyone who is under my protection." The words were a warning, a promise, and a subtle declaration of possession all at once. My entire being recoiled, yet a small, dangerous part of me acknowledged the raw power behind the statement. He protected what was his. He then shifted, pulling a thick folder from a drawer. "Your credentials, Ms. Clara, are impeccable. A master's in early childhood education, extensive work in child psychology, and a minor in behavioral economics?" He raised a brow, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. My surprise must have been evident. "It was a secondary interest," I admitted. "Understanding decision-making, incentives, market forces." "Fascinating," he murmured, his gaze holding mine. "The dynamics of power, the manipulation of choice. Tell me, Ms. Clara, if you were to manage an enterprise, what would be your first move if you suspected a breach of trust from within?" My mind, still reeling from the day's events, began to whir. This was a test. He was not asking for an academic answer. He wanted to know how I thought, how I approached problems. The teacher in me, the part that loved to analyze and strategize, pushed past the fear. "First, I would observe," I began, my voice gaining strength as I immersed myself in the problem. Not just the suspect, but those around them. Disloyalty rarely happens in a vacuum. It requires an environment, a fertile ground. Second, I would identify their motivation. What do they gain? What do they truly want? Money? Power? Revenge? Respect? Once you understand the underlying motivation, you can predict their next move, or perhaps offer a counter-incentive. He watched me, utterly still, absorbing every word. The intensity of his gaze was electrifying, a spark igniting between us that was less about attraction and more about intellectual sparring. And if a counter-incentive is not feasible, if their motivation is ideological, then you must understand the ideology, I replied, leaning forward slightly, caught in the intellectual chase. And dismantle its foundations. Or if it's too entrenched, you isolate it. Prevent it from spreading. You don't cut out one bad apple if the entire barrel is compromised. You deal with the source of the rot. A slow, deliberate smile, devoid of mirth, stretched his lips. It sent a tremor through me, a chilling recognition of a kindred spirit in the dark art of strategy. "Remarkable," he breathed, the word a silken caress. "You speak of human nature as if it were a complex algorithm, a code to be cracked." "It is," I said, feeling a strange surge of confidence. "We are all driven by predictable patterns, by desires. Even fear can be an incentive." Just then, the sharp ring of his private line cut through the air. He frowned, a flash of annoyance darkening his features. It was a rare, unguarded glimpse of a crack in his composure. He picked up the receiver, his voice dropping to a low, clipped Russian. My ears, trained to pick up nuances from children's cries, caught fragments of the conversation. "Shipment. Harbor. Police. Leak." My breath caught. Police? A leak? This wasn't some distant abstract threat. This was immediate, visceral. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping. He glanced at me, a quick, intense look before returning to the caller. His words became sharper, more urgent. He was losing something important. He slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the silent study. His eyes, now colder than the winter sea, locked onto mine. "A new complication. he stated, his voice a low growl. Someone has betrayed me. Again, a different game. A different player. He rose, walking to the immense window overlooking the sprawling estate, his back to me. His shoulders, usually so impossibly broad, seemed to carry a sudden immense weight. For a fleeting second he seemed vulnerable. Not weak but burdened. Police involvement implies a higher level of orchestration, I murmured, thinking aloud. The behavioral economics major in me piecing together the fragments. Not just a disgruntled associate. Someone with connections. Someone who understands the vulnerabilities of your operation. He turned slowly, his gaze still holding that unexpected glint of strain. Precisely, he agreed, his voice rougher now. And they are moving fast. Too fast. I stood, moving towards him, an impulse I couldn't explain. What kind of vulnerability? I asked, my voice softer, more genuinely curious. Is it about logistics, supply chain, or reputation? He looked at me, a long, searching gaze, as if weighing my usefulness. They have targeted a specific shipment, he finally admitted, his voice a low confession. A shipment that is not merely financial. It is symbolic. A blow to my authority would be a blow to my very foundations. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of frustration I hadn't seen from him before. Then the play isn't about the merchandise, I reasoned, pushing past my fear, seeing only the complex problem. It's about the message. To you and to your people, he nodded, a terse, almost imperceptible movement. They want to destabilize, to show weakness, and they are using unorthodox methods. My mind raced. Unorthodox. Police. Symbolic. Is it possible, I ventured, choosing my words with extreme care, that they are not just trying to steal from you, but to corner you, to force you into a specific response? To expose something else entirely? His eyes narrowed further, the storm gray deepening. He stared at me, a long, assessing silence stretching between us. You think this is not about profit alone, he stated, his voice low. A dangerous hum. Profit is a primary motivation for most players, I countered, finding a surprising confidence in my intellectual contribution. But control, humiliation, or proving a point can be just as valuable, especially when challenging a well-established enterprise. I met his gaze, unflinching. A flicker of something. Respect. Calculated interest. Crossed his face. He took a step closer, infringing on my space once more, but this time, the scent of wood and danger was laced with something else. A desperate kind of intensity. You have a quick mind, Ms. Clara. A dangerous one. He paused. Then, to my astonishment, he gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod. I will consider your insights. Now return to your room. It is late, and this complication requires my full attention. The dismissal was swift, but the acknowledgement, however subtle, fueled a surprising triumph within me. I had not cowered. I had not simply obeyed. I had contributed. I had made an active choice, using my skills, and he had listened. A tiny shard of power, sharp and thrilling, lodged itself in my chest. I walked back up the grand staircase, the silence of the mansion pressing in. The previous fear of the wolf, the fear of being trapped, had been replaced by a new kind of anxiety, a thrill mixed with dread. I was in deeper now. I had stepped into his game, however briefly, and that made me a player, not just a pawn. My room was still, the emerald gown folded neatly where I had left it. I felt a strange restlessness, the analytical part of my brain still buzzing with the fragments of Nikolai's conversation. Police, symbolic, unorthodox. It didn't sit right. I moved to the large windows, drawn by an instinct I couldn't articulate. The night was moonless, shrouded in an inky blackness. The sprawling estate was silent, illuminated only by distant, discreet lights. I pressed my face against the cold glass, trying to pierce the gloom, to make sense of the unease prickling at my skin. Then, a flicker, a movement at the very edge of the forest line, too quick to identify. My breath hitched. Was it an animal, or was it... Before I could complete the thought, a sharp, deafening crack shattered the silence of the night, followed by the sickening splinter of glass. The window in front of me exploded inward, showering me with razor-sharp fragments. A searing pain blossomed in my arm as something hot and fast tore through my flesh. My scream caught in my throat, swallowed by the roar of the blast. I stumbled backward, clutching my bleeding arm, my mind struggling to process the sudden, violent assault. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and shattered glass. Another loud thwack echoed from the wall directly behind where I had stood, followed by a shower of plaster. This wasn't a warning. This was an attack, a direct lethal strike, and I knew with horrifying certainty that the target had been me. I gazed wildly at the gaping hole in the window, shards of glass gleaming like malevolent teeth, and then at the dark, impenetrable forest beyond. Someone was out there, and they wanted me dead. The window in front of me exploded inward, showering me with razor-sharp fragments. A searing pain blossomed in my arm as something hot and fast tore through my flesh. My scream caught in my throat, swallowed by the roar of the blast. I stumbled backward, clutching my bleeding arm, my mind struggling to process the sudden, violent assault. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and shattered glass. Another loud thwack echoed from the wall directly behind where I had stood, followed by a shower of plaster. This wasn't a warning. This was an attack, a direct lethal strike, and I knew with horrifying certainty that the target had been me. I gazed wildly at the gaping hole in the window, shards of glass gleaming like malevolent teeth, and then at the dark, impenetrable forest beyond. Someone was out there, and they wanted me dead. My arm screamed in protest, a fiery line across my bicep, but the pain galvanized me. I scrambled, diving behind the thick velvet drapes, pressing myself against the wall, shards of glass crunching beneath my knees. Another shot ripped through the air, tearing into the headboard of the king-sized bed, sending splinters flying. They weren't trying to scare me. They were aiming to kill. The heavy oak door burst open, not with a bang, but with a controlled force that spoke of immense power. Nikolai stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette imposing against the dim hall light, a lethal shadow. Cage, a growling mass of midnight fur and bared teeth, was at his side, its amber eyes fixed on the shattered window. Nikolai's gaze swept over the ruined room, the smoking bullet holes, the broken glass, and finally landed on me, huddled behind the curtain. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping violently. The controlled fury radiating from him was a palpable force, chilling the air even more than the broken window. Clara. His voice was a raw, guttural command, stripped of all artifice. It wasn't a question. It was an order for me to be whole, to be alive. My arm, I gasped, pressing my good hand against the gash, sticky warmth seeping between my fingers. From the window, there... Outside! Cage let out a terrifying bark, a sound of pure aggression, then sprang towards the window, its massive body clearing the sill in a single fluid leap. A volley of gunshots erupted from the grounds below, met by the frenzied snarls of the wolf. "Stay down," Nikolai bellowed, his voice vibrating with rage. He was already moving, but not towards me. He pulled a sleek black handgun from inside his jacket, his movements fluid, deadly. He barked orders into a hidden earpiece in rapid Russian, his tone urgent, sharp. "Perimeter breach. West wing, second floor. Secure Alexei, code red." I repeat, code red. The mansion erupted. Footsteps thundered down hallways. Shouts, more gunshots, closer now, echoing from the lower floors. This wasn't just a sniper. This was a coordinated invasion. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. My eyes darted from the gaping window to Nikolai, who was already at the shattered frame, peering out, gun raised. He was a general on a battlefield, calculating, precise. "What did you see?" he demanded, without turning. "A flicker," I rasped, my mind racing through the chaos, trying to be useful, at the tree line. Then the shot came from above, elevated position, and the second shot, at the bed, was from the same angle. "They're precise, professionals." He gave a sharp nod. "Snipers covering the breach team." His voice was cold, lethal. "Good, stay down. My men are coming," but I couldn't stay down. My mind, trained to observe patterns, to analyze intent, spun with the fragments of our earlier conversation. "Unorthodox methods," I whispered, almost to myself. "Symbolic, not just a theft, a message." Nikolai glanced back, a flicker of that intellectual curiosity in his eyes, even amidst the fury. "What message?" "They know you're in the study," I articulated, pushing past the terror, the pieces clicking into place. "They expected you to be there. This attack, it's not to kill me, not primarily. It's to draw you out, to force you to expose your forces, your reactions, to show your priorities." My gaze landed on the hole in the headboard, and perhaps to separate you from Alexei, to make you choose. His eyes widened, a dawning comprehension replacing the pure rage. A feint, he breathed, his voice laced with venomous admiration. You think they want to lure me into a trap? A deafening crash from below, then a scream that was abruptly cut short, confirmed my terrifying hypothesis. My blood ran cold. They're inside, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This room was a distraction. They're not interested in the bedroom. They want the study or Alexei. Nikolai's face hardened into a mask of pure, murderous intent. Alexei, he snarled, turning from the window, his gaze sweeping the room again. They're trying to draw me away from him. They want to isolate him. He moved, not towards the door, but towards a hidden panel in the wall I hadn't noticed. He pulled it open, revealing a small, dark passage. This leads to his solarium. A direct route, but it's unprotected. I can't risk it being compromised already. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a desperate urgency. You were right about the intent. Now, what do you suggest, Ms. Clara? What is the counter-move? My head was light from shock and blood loss, but my mind sharpened, adrenaline coursing. If they want to draw you out, you don't go, I said, the words tumbling out. You consolidate. You bring Alexei to you, and you use their expectation against them. Another rapid burst of Russian into his earpiece. The East Wing is clear, Don Volkov. Irina has Alexei. She's bringing him to your study. A flicker of relief, quickly suppressed, crossed Nikolai's face. Irina is loyal, he murmured. He looked at me, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Good, you will come with me. To the study, we will draw them in. He extended a hand, not gently, but with a fierce pull that demanded immediate action. I didn't hesitate. I pushed myself up, wincing at the pain in my arm, and took his hand. His grip was iron, surprisingly steadying. We moved, a blur of motion, through the hidden passage. The air grew cold, heavy. The sounds of the battle below intensified, a symphony of destruction. The passage opened into a hidden alcove behind the study's bookshelves. Nikolai pulled me through, then slammed the panel shut, plunging us into the relative quiet of the study. Alexei was there, huddled with Irina behind Nikolai's massive desk, his small face pale but resolute. Cage was already there, too, having somehow found its way through the chaos, now standing sentinel by Alexei's side, a low growl rumbling in its chest. Papa, Alexei whispered, fear and relief warring in his voice. Nikolai gave his son a terse nod, a silent promise of protection. His eyes, however, were on me. Irina, bind her arm quickly. Irina, efficient as ever, produced a medical kit from a hidden compartment. Her nimble fingers cleaned and bandaged my wound, the sting of antiseptic momentarily eclipsing the phantom pain. The study door, heavy oak, suddenly shuddered under a tremendous impact. Wood groaned. They're here, Nikolai stated, his voice devoid of inflection. He drew a second handgun, placing it on the desk. They will expect me to be alone, or with a few guards. He looked at me, a dangerous glint in his eyes. They won't expect you, my breath hitched. He wasn't just going to protect me. He was going to use me. The adrenaline surged again, chasing away the remnants of fear. This was my active choice, my participation. Another shudder, louder this time. The door began to splinter. When they break through, Nikolai commanded, his voice low and precise. Irina, you shield Alexei. Clara, you will stand by the desk here. He indicated a spot next to him. They will see you. They will dismiss you. That will be their mistake. He handed me the second handgun. Its weight was cold and foreign in my palm, my fingers trembling around the unfamiliar grip. Can you fire this? I met his gaze, unflinching. I don't know, I admitted, the truth stark. He gave a ghost of a smile, a flash of white in the grim fortress of his face. Good. Don't lie to me, point it. And if I tell you to shoot, you shoot. At their legs, at their arms. At anything that isn't a vital organ. You will not kill. You will disable. You will create chaos. My mind word. This wasn't just about survival. It was about disruption, about psychological warfare. It was my game, played on his battlefield. The door crashed inward with a final splintering roar, revealing 3 figures silhouetted against the dim hallway. They were masked, clad in black, armed with assault rifles. They paused, surveying the room, clearly expecting to find Nikolai alone, perhaps surrounded by a few bodyguards. Instead, they saw Nikolai, Irina, a small boy, and me, a disheveled woman with a bandaged arm holding a handgun like an alien object. The lead assailant, a burly figure, chuckled, A harsh, grating sound. Well, Don Volkov. Brought your family to the slaughter? He raised his rifle. Before he could fire, Nikolai moved with terrifying speed, dropping to one knee, firing 2 precise shots. The burly man stumbled, clutching his leg. One of his accomplices moved to engage Nikolai, but Cage, a blur of dark fur, launched itself from behind the desk, tackling the man with brutal force. A scream of agony ripped through the air as the wolf's teeth found flesh. The third assailant, momentarily distracted by the chaos, focused on me. His eyes, visible through the mask, narrowed in contempt. A female civilian. An easy target. He advanced. Clara, now! Nikolai's command ripped through the room. My heart leaped into my throat. Every instinct screamed against it, against the violence, the cold metal in my hand. But the image of Liam's train, the terrified little girl, Alexei's innocent face flashed through my mind. This was a different game. This was for survival. I raised the handgun, my hands shaking, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil was jarring, unexpected. The shot went wide, embedding itself in the wall near the assailant's head. He flinched, surprised, then cursed. Again! Nikolai roared, already reloading his own weapon. I fired again, aiming lower, just as Nikolai had commanded. This time the bullet struck the assailant's arm, a dull thud, eliciting a sharp cry of pain. His rifle clattered to the floor. The room devolved into a maelstrom of gunshots, growls, and grunts. Nikolai was a whirlwind of controlled violence, moving with an impossible grace, his shots precise, brutal. My second shot, though far from fatal, had created the chaos Nikolai sought. It had broken their rhythm, thrown them off their game. One of Nikolai's men, a stocky figure with a grim expression, burst into the study, laying down suppressing fire. More men poured in behind him, sealing off the room, turning the tables on the invaders. The battle, once focused on my bedroom, was now contained and controlled. But as the remaining assailants were swiftly neutralized, a figure emerged from the shadow of the shattered doorframe. He wasn't one of the masked attackers. He wore a tailored suit, his face contorted with a sneering triumph. It was Boris, Nikolai's trusted enforcer. His eyes met mine, a chilling smirk spreading across his lips. "You're a fool, Volkov," Boris sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "This woman has made you weak, sent you scrambling to protect her, leaving yourself vulnerable. Your empire crumbles from within." He held a small gleaming knife, its blade wickedly sharp, pointing it at Alexei, who was still shielded by Irina. My blood ran cold. He hadn't been a victim of disloyalty. He was the disloyalty. The new associate, Ivan, had been a smokescreen. The unorthodox methods meant an inside man. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Nikolai, his face a mask of incandescent rage, began to move towards Boris, but the traitor held the knife closer to Alexei, a terrible warning. "One step, Volkov, and the boy gets it. Then the woman. Then I take what's mine." My gaze darted between Boris, the knife, and Alexei. My mind raced faster than it ever had. I had to do something. Nikolai was frozen, a rare moment of vulnerability. "Boris," I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence, surprisingly steady. My arm throbbed, but I ignored it. "You're making a mistake." He chuckled, a nasty sound. "Oh, the little teacher thinks she knows everything. Your little theories won't save you now, sweetheart." "This isn't about theory," I countered, taking a subtle step to my left, drawing his focus. "It's about leverage. You think killing Alexei and me will give you power? It will only unleash Nikolai's full wrath. He will hunt you down, and he will make you regret every breath you take. You saw what happened to Ivan? Imagine that, but 10 times worse. Your goal isn't death. It's control. You need to bargain. And a dead prince and a dead teacher are useless in that negotiation." I met his gaze, an icy challenge in my eyes. "What do you really want, Boris? The throne? Or just to make Nikolai suffer?" My words hit their mark. Boris's smirk faltered. A flicker of uncertainty, a flash of greed warring with fear crossed his face. He had underestimated me. He had seen a pawn, not a player. Nikolai, seeing my subtle deflection, seeing Boris's moment of doubt, seized the opportunity. His men, understanding the silent command, began to shift, to surround Boris from new angles. "You want a bargain, Boris?" I continued, pressing my advantage, drawing his eyes back to me. "Then you need us alive. You need to leverage our lives, not throw them away in a fit of pique." Boris hesitated, his gaze still fixed on me, contemplating my words, his grip on the knife loosening by a fraction. That was all Nikolai needed. With a terrifying surge of speed, he closed the distance between them, a dark blur of motion. Boris cried out, caught completely off guard. Nikolai moved with brutal efficiency, disarming him in a single, fluid motion, then slamming him against the wall with bone-crushing force. The knife clattered harmlessly to the floor. Boris let out a strangled gasp, his face contorted in agony as Nikolai's hand, like a vice, closed around his throat. Nikolai's eyes, burning with a cold, murderous fury, bore into the traitors. He said nothing, but the message was clear. There would be no mercy. His men quickly moved in, dragging the gasping Boris away. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by Alexei's soft whimpers. Nikolai stood there, breathing hard, his gaze sweeping over his son, then over me, a raw, protective intensity in his eyes. He walked to me, his steps heavy. He lifted my bandaged arm, examining the bloodstains seeping through the white cloth. His thumb brushed over my skin, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver through me. His face, still etched with fury, softened almost imperceptibly. "You are hurt," he murmured, the words laced with a dangerous tenderness. "I'm fine," I whispered, adrenaline still thrumming, the weight of the handgun suddenly heavy. He took the weapon from my hand, his fingers brushing mine again, a silent current passing between us. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble, his eyes holding mine. "You understood the game. You played it. You saved us all." My cheeks flushed. The praise, the intensity of his gaze, the sheer, intoxicating rush of having contributed, of having mattered, was a potent cocktail. Everything in me screamed that this was wrong, that I should be terrified, but a traitorous part, the part that had longed for significance, for purpose beyond scraped by anonymity, thrilled at his words, at his fierce approval. He led me from the study, leaving the cleanup to his men. We walked in silence through the still, darkened halls, the sounds of the attack fading into a grim memory. My arm throbbed, a constant ache, but the thrumming excitement in my veins overshadowed it. He took me to his private quarters, not my expansive suite. This room was smaller, more Spartan, yet intensely masculine. Dark wood, a massive, unadorned bed. He sat me on the edge of the bed, then went to a private bathroom, returning with a new, expertly prepared first aid kit. He cleaned my wound again, his movements surprisingly gentle, his large fingers careful as he changed the dressing. His proximity, the scent of wood smoke and expensive cologne, filled my senses, making my skin prickle. "You are a formidable woman, Clara," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on my face. More than I ever anticipated, my heart hammered. The raw honesty in his words, the vulnerability in his momentary pause was disarming. "You underestimated me," I responded, my voice barely a whisper. "You saw a desperate teacher, not a strategist." His eyes, dark as midnight, met mine. "Perhaps," he conceded, a glint of something unreadable in their depths. "And now, what do we do with this new understanding?" He leaned closer, his scent enveloping me, his hand coming to rest gently on my uninjured arm, his thumb tracing slow, deliberate circles on my skin. The tension between us was a palpable thing, a living current. "You've shown me your world, Nikolai," I said, finding my voice, my gaze meeting his. "The danger, the power, the ruthlessness." I paused, remembering the feel of the gun in my hand, the surge of adrenaline, the cold satisfaction of hitting my target. "And you've shown me a part of myself I didn't know existed." His eyes darkened, a predatory gleam returning. But this time, it felt less like a threat, and more like a shared secret. He lowered his head, his lips hovering inches from mine, his breath warm against my skin. "That part of you, Clara," he murmured, his voice a silken rasp that bypassed my ears and went straight to my core, "belongs here. With me, it belongs to us." My internal battlefield raged, a tempest of conflicting desires. Everything in me screamed to run, to cling to the fragments of my old, safe life. But that traitorous part, the part that had tasted power and found it intoxicating, that had felt a strange, undeniable thrill in the face of death, whispered, yes. It was a surrender, yes, but also a claim. A recognition of a truth I couldn't deny. His lips claimed mine, a fierce, hungry kiss that was not gentle, but absolute. It was a kiss of triumph, of possession, of shared survival. My body, still shaking from the terror and the adrenaline, responded with an instinct I hadn't known I possessed. My hands, still stained with my own blood, found their way to his dark hair, clutching, pulling him closer. The consummation was a primal release, a desperate claiming born of near death and intoxicating power, a violent unraveling of all the careful walls I had built around myself. It was a transaction of pleasure, as he had promised, but in that transaction, I found a dark pleasure of my own, a power in the surrender, a thrill in the absolute intensity of his focus, his desire, his control. The following morning, the mansion was quiet again, a stark contrast to the night's chaos. My body ached, a sweet, pervasive soreness that was both a reminder of the battle and the intimacy that followed. I lay in his bed, tangled in his sheets, the emerald dress discarded on the floor like a forgotten skin. He was already dressed, standing by the massive window, looking out over the now peaceful grounds. He turned as I stirred, his gaze sweeping over me, possessive, calculating. He walked to the bed, a folded document in his hand. "Clara," he began, his voice devoid of the previous night's raw passion, returning to its controlled baritone. "The threat has been neutralized. Boris will trouble no one again." His eyes held mine, unblinking. "The agreement we made was under duress, on your part at least." My heart began to pound. This was it, the moment of reckoning. "I am a man who honors his word," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "But I will not chain a woman who does not wish to be here. I offer you a choice. Your freedom, a new identity, funds, a life anywhere in the world, far from this. Enterprise, far from me. Alexei will be cared for, of course, and you will receive regular updates on his well-being. No one will pursue you. You will be safe, and you will be free." He extended the document. It was a divorce decree, already signed by him. My gaze drifted from the paper to his face, a blank canvas of ruthless resolve. This was a true test, a genuine choice. The safe, predictable life I had once craved. A life without fear, without blood, without the crushing weight of his absolute control. Everything in me yearned for that simple peace. But then I thought of Boris, of the knife, of the cold surge of power as I spoke, as I held the gun, as I played the game and won. I thought of Alexei, his small hand in mine, his innocent face, and I thought of Nikolai, the dangerous intellect behind those storm-gray eyes, the protective rage that had torn through the night, the way his body had claimed mine, and the dark fire it had ignited within me. I looked at the divorce papers, then back at him, my eyes meeting his. A slow, defiant smile touched my lips, a mirror of his own predatory curve. "You think I want to be free, Nikolai?" I asked, my voice gaining strength, infused with a new, steel-like resolve. "You offered me survival. You showed me a hidden strength. You showed me the exhilarating edge of chaos, and the power that lies within it." I pushed the papers back across the bedside table, deliberately, definitively. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise, then something akin to dangerous triumph, lighting their depths. "I didn't fall in love with a man. Nikolai," I declared, my voice steady, uncompromising. "I fell in love with the king, and I want my share of the throne." My gaze was resolute, unwavering. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose the empire, and I choose the power that comes with it, as your partner, in every sense of the word." A slow smile, genuine and utterly possessive, spread across his face, transforming his features from granite to molten steel. He reached out, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. "Welcome home, my queen," he murmured, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that resonated deep within me, sealing our twisted, unbreakable bond.